Before we start, please support our channel by subscribing, and click the bell icon for future notifications. Now, let's start. What's up everyone? Thanks and welcome to Gemma Movie Recap. We're gonna tell a story of one of my favorites drama comedy from 2016 today. A street cat named Bob. On the streets of London, our film opens. James Bowen is our main character. James is a street performer who plays his guitar while singing and playing mediocre tunes for mediocre tips. One guy actually gives him a half-eaten sandwich as payment. James is off-key singing, as you might have predicted, doesn't really help him make a living. He forages by digging through trash cans while living on the streets. It was quite dreary and there wasn't even a cat to be found. One night, James is currently munching on his eaten sandwich. James is approached by a man by the name of Baz, who starts to badger him about where he might be. We begin to understand that James is a drug addict who swears that he's going clean. But Baz, also a drug addict, doesn't believe him. James goes to a takeout shop for a meal. The money accumulated by doing all day is not enough to pay for it. He's just a little understaffed and the shopkeeper's refusing to serve him, instead throwing all the food down the sink and forcing James out. James is now kicked out from the shop, and he searches for somewhere to spend the night. But all the good spots have already been claimed. He walks past a car when Baz stuck his head out and tells him to get inside. The car belongs to someone who forgot to lock it. Baz has a little bag of heroin to offer James. He's trying to resist, but his day has sucked, and it's just easier to give in. In the morning, the car owner comes and notices that Baz and James were in his car. Baz wakes up and runs out from the car, but James is still fast asleep. The car owner sees that James isn't moving. He is afraid about it. He doesn't want to start his day with someone dead in his car. James is rushed to the hospital and luckily he survives. When he regains consciousness, his social worker and emergency contact, Val, enter the room, and she's upset with James. James was trying to quit drugs, but he takes methadone, a synthetic opioid used in drug addiction treatment, daily. However, mixing heroin and methadone can cause a near-fatal overdose, which is exactly what happened to him when he took up Baz's offer. He's also contracted hepatitis from the infected needle. James visits Val's office after being released from the hospital to review their treatment plan. When Val inquires about James' parental status, we already know that he is the unluckiest person in the world, so the revelation that his family despises him doesn't come as a major surprise. While Val tries to get James emergency housing, James returns to his life as a street performer. She is questioned about why she is so involved in James's case even though many other people have housing needs that are just as urgent. She confesses that she genuinely believes he can change for the better if he could only stop living on the streets. Finally, the woman procures a room for James as long as he keeps up with his methadone doses. The wallpaper is crumbling and the neighborhood is rough. But it's still better than living on the streets. That night James has taken a much-needed bath. Suddenly, when he hears rustling in the kitchen, he wraps a towel around his waist and arms himself and goes to check it out. He searches around the kitchen and finally found an orange cat. This cat is friendly, so James brings milk and cereal to it. The cat decides it lives there now and refuses to leave despite James's prodding. James allowing the cat to stay in the house for just one night. He plays his guitar to the cat for the remainder of the evening before going to bed. And the cat follows him, snuggling up next to him for the night while purring loudly. The next day, James tries to find the cat's owners. He walks around the neighborhood with a cat in his hand and knocks on doors to ask about any missing cats. But no one's claiming it. Then, he places it on a patch of grass in the hopes that it will return home on its own. James continues to live his life as a street performer while also seeing the pharmacist every day to pick up his methadone as agreed. One day, when James is being berated by a shopkeeper, he sees his dad walking down the street and makes an attempt to catch up with him. So his father, whose name is Jack, doesn't look very pleased to see his son. When James informs him that he is no longer using heroin and is enrolled in a rehabilitation program, he tries to avoid James' talk and doesn't seem at all convinced. Then Hillary, James's stepmother, appears, tugging Jack away, coldly ignoring James. James tries to get invitation for Christmas dinner, but she adamantly declines. Despite going clean and getting off the street, the family still sees him as a lost cause and their prejudice runs deep. Before leaving, Jack gives his kids some money and feigns an idea that they might ask him over another day. It's just 20 pounds. James only has pennies in his pockets, thus he is unable to decline it. After that, he heads home and found the orange cat on his doorstep with scratch marks on its body, and James is at loss for what to do. He bundles it up in his coat and tries to find the owner of the cat again. Then, he meets with Betty, who he'd seen a few times working as a dog walker. She invites him inside. Her house is decorated with New Age hippie decor, including beaded drapes, vintage furniture, and vague abstract murals. So when she makes a joke about James and the cat having a spiritual connection, he believes her. She inspects the wound and claims that the cat needs antibiotics. James cites because vets are quite pricey and the cat doesn't have a wallet. Betty gives James the number of a vet from a local charity that can treat the cat for free. She gives the cat an extremely unique and interesting name, Bob. James takes Bob to the animal clinic Betty recommended, and settles in for a long wait. He missing appointment with Val. The clinic cleans Bob's wounds, but James gets a bill for it. The antibiotics cost 22 pounds. James begs the receptionist for help, but she is unimpressed despite his admission that 20 pounds that his father gave him was for the food in a week. In the end, James coughs up the cash and buys Bob's medication. At home, James gets into trouble. Bob refuses to swallow the pills. Feeling defeated, he takes Bob to Betty and she gets the pills down that cat's throat in minutes. They get conversation and Betty casually mentions that she despises drugs and drug users. Technically, he has won them. He decides to completely dodge the matter and instead informs Betty that he's a musician. Afterwards, James schedules another appointment with Val. She gets mad that he skipped the previous meeting because they had an agreement and James would lose the house if he didn't fulfill his obligations. Val is now even more anxious as James tries to explain about the cat and Betty, since taking on too much responsibility too soon could lead to James relapsing. A few weeks later, Betty and Bob arrive for Bob's neutering procedures because unneutered cats don't fare well on the streets. The operation goes well and Bob gets the cone of shame so he can't lick his stitches. James and Bob currently share a full-time home and have a strong bond. One day, James goes to his usual spot to perform for tips with Bob sneakily boards the bus before the bus drives out of the bus stop. James is annoyed, but the other people on the bus are charmed by Bob as he leaps into his lap to enjoy the sights of London. The ticket seller even provides Bob an old shoelace that he can use as a temporary leash, which James ties around Bob's throat. Bob feels uncomfortable with a leash and pulls in all directions to stop at stores or sniff drain pipes. So James lifts up Bob and places him on his shoulders. And finally, they arrived at Covent Garden, a busy area of the city where James likes to perform alongside other buskers. Bob is loved by the pedestrians. He helps James in attracting a sizable crowd and decent tips for the first time ever. After a while of playing, James joyfully counts his tips and asks Bob if he would like to work another shift tomorrow. James is now noticed by earlier addict Baz, who follows the two. With bags under his eyes and sallow skin, he appears even more worn out than before. With a place to stay and no longer using, James, on the other hand, looks better than ever. James buys Bob a harness and better food with his newfound income. The following day, they set out for Covent Garden once more, where they briefly run into Betty who are engaged in a protest against farm animal cruelty. And suddenly Baz comes to James. James knows better to associate with him and refuses to let Baz crash at his place. He gives him some cash in exchange for his assurance that he will use it to buy food rather than drugs. Baz takes the money and leaves quickly. More weeks go by as James and Bob continue to perform while Bob is sitting on the guitar and James is strumming and singing. They are now a Covent Garden crowd favorite, and a kind elderly woman even knits Bob a little blue scarf. James invites Betty over for dinner but she admits that she's a level 4 vegan. So Betty suggests to cook dinner at her place and James takes her up on the offer. After they had dinner, James is heading home from a grocery store run one day when he finds Baz unconscious outside with an empty syringe by him. He rushes over asking passerby to call an ambulance and Betty comes out to help. Afterward, still reeling from what happened that night, Betty tells James that her brother overdosed and passed away. He was actually found dead in the bathroom of the home she now resides in, with the needle still lodged in his arm. The look on her face solidifies, and because of that James is will to get clean. In his subsequent meeting with Val, He requests to stop using methadone. He has already been weaned off to a very small dosage by this point. However, Val believes that it is still far too early for him to stop using it altogether. When the holidays are over, she promises to allow him to stop soon. James and Betty are now having a wonderful Christmas together. Nevertheless, Betty refers to the holiday as Cadme's because she opposes its establishment. She gives him a painting and James serenades her with his guitar. James decides to spend New Year's with his family. Although they've given no indication that they want him around. He brings Bob and a bottle of wine to his family's home. When he makes an effort to be cordial with his two stepsisters, they abruptly declare him to be a junkie. Jack tries to get James out of the house, but all hell breaks loose when Bob leaps out of the code and runs around breaking an anti-glass. James is forced to leave as a result of Hillary yelling at him and the father for even letting him inside the house. The next day at Covent Garden, more mayhem breaks out when a dog walker picks a fight as James is performing. When the police arrive, James is exonerated because the CCTV footage clearly demonstrates that he did nothing wrong. Val's called in. She quickly deduces that James has stopped taking his prescribed daily dose of methadone and that Bob can only be picked up from the police kennel if James returns right away to the pharmacy to pick up his daily dosage. James, being terrified he'll lose Bob, races to the hospital and knocks back that methadone. Not knowing that Betty's standing behind him, and she realizes that James is a drug addict. She breaks up their friendship on the spot. After the incident at Covent Garden, James is prohibited to perform for 6 months. Which means he lost his only source of income. With Bob by his side, he accepts a position at the Big Issue selling magazine copies. As usual, the cat draws clients who purchase the copies in order to take a selfie with them. One man even takes photos of James and Bob to publish in his paper. A fellow seller who also works at the Big Issue is envious of James's success picking a fight and having James kicked off the job for a month. James is struggling to feed Bob, who is down to his last few coins due to his repeated unemployment. He busks on the corners, which irritates Betty because if he is discovered doing so during his 6-month suspension, he will be arrested and put in jail. She yells at him once more, but inadvertently expresses her romantic feelings. After a month, the ban on selling copies of the major issue is lifted. He can now resume selling copies. However, he quickly gets into an altercation with a woman who wants to buy Bob from him. Not so subtly implying that James can't take care of him properly because he's poor. As they're arguing, another dog scares Bob and Bob runs off. James has now been looking for Bob for 2 days. Being ineffective, he is almost tempted to buy drugs from the drug dealers who frequent his apartment complex while he waits at home. After nearly purchasing drugs on the 3rd day, he returns home to find Bob waiting for him in the kitchen. James is certain he can stop taking methadone and achieve complete sobriety now that Bob is back. Val agrees to let him stop taking his medication every day but expresses concern about how difficult it would be to taper off. James knocks Betty's door and informs that he will be inside for the next few days fighting withdrawal. He doesn't expect her to open the door, but she does anyway. She offers to bring him food, so that he wouldn't have any reason to go outside and be tempted. James endures the days in complete agony due to his withdrawal symptoms. He's shivering all night, throwing up everything he eats. Betty's bringing groceries. However, aside from that, he is by himself and fighting the urge to go out and score with Bob. After a week, the withdrawal symptoms subside. One morning, James awakens and discovers that he no longer has a drug craving. He says goodbye to Val in his final appointment. James comes home to find that Betty's moving up from the compound. Soon after, James received a call from a literary agency. When he arrives at the agency meeting, he learns that they intend to write a book based on his adventures with Bob. James is given a laptop by the agency so he can write down what he can and is paired with a ghostwriter to assist. After the meeting, James knocks on his father's door to let him know that he is totally drug-free. On the day that a street cat named Bob is released, hundreds of people wait outside London's bookstores. James is asked to conduct book tours and press conferences because of how well it performs. Betty attends, as does his father and Bob, of course. James is able to stop busking and selling copies of the Big Issue. Thanks to the book's success, James and Bob remain inseparable even after he moves out of the supported housing and buys his own house. They both work for organizations that support at-risk youth and animals. Our story comes to a happy ending. Based on the true story of the real James Bowen. The end. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to watch other videos. See you in the next video.